Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. Attendance today at Helping Parents Heal support group meeting is voluntary, and we are here for the benefit of learning from and sharing with other parents whose child has passed away. It is understood that our discussions are intended to be confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents to become shining light parents by providing support and resources to aid in the healing process. We go a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence, but in a non-dogmatic way. We welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and allow for a very open type dialogue. We receive all and do not judge people or their children on the basis of life choices. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers to allow parents to be informed about many possible ways to heal, to connect with their children, and to learn about the afterlife. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Helping Parents Heal, and we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally.
Thank you, Kathy. Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce William. And I must say that I feel incredibly grateful to know William because of the fact that he approached me last year and explained to me that he wanted to record my experiences with Morgan when he passed at the base camp of Mount Everest. And I think a lot of you know that I got an enormous hug from him when he crossed, and that actually it was very hard for me to feel sad once that had happened. Every time that I started feeling sad, I'd get this hug from Morgan, and I never really understood this. I thought, gosh, this must be something that all parents experience. And then I realized that it wasn't necessarily something that all parents experience immediately, but I now understand it so much more from speaking to William. William Peters, MED, is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, whose mission is to raise awareness and educate people about the profound and healing experiences that are possible for the dying and their loved ones. As the director of the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, SCRI, William and his team collect and study extraordinary end-of-life experiences, shared crossings, and are recognized as the world's leading authority on the shared death experience. He has developed methods to facilitate these shared crossings and to assist experiencers in meaningfully integrating their experiences. William conducts workshops and presents nationally on his research. He is a licensed psychotherapist at the Family Therapy Institute in Santa Barbara, where he specializes in end-of-life counseling as a means towards psycho-spiritual evolution. William has served as a Zen hospice volunteer, and his work is informed by his 2 near-death experiences and a variety of shared death experiences. William's book, co-authored with Dr. Michael Kinsella, is entitled Halfway to Heaven and will be published by Simon & Schuster for worldwide release in 2021. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming William Peters.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Wonderful to be here this evening, and I really feel a kinship with your community. Always have. I've had my own experiences, which I'll detail this evening. I think by the end of my talk and the research I present, I think you'll see that what I and my team have found really deeply affirm many of the experiences that the people in your community have had. But at first, I want to just thank everyone for showing up tonight. Needless to say, we are in an unprecedented time, and if you are, stressed out or have suffered from the impacts of the COVID pandemic, I just want to, I just want to express my condolences and thank you for being here with us. Also, there's so much else going on in our world, so I feel thankful that you're joining us. And I think you'll find the topic that we'll go today is truly one of the perennial topics that has been addressed and questioned and queried throughout time. This question of, what happens to us upon human death? What happens to those we love? And what happens to the sense of self? Does it continue? The modern medical establishment tends to assert that when our brain ceases functioning, so does anything related to ourselves, and more specifically, they call that consciousness. So with that, I'm going to say a few things about why I think we're really relevant to you all, and that is that the grief model, if you want to call it a grief model, that Helping Parents Heal asserts, and the one that Elizabeth has shared with me on a few occasions, is radically different than what I'm a trained psychotherapist, what we advocate for in our trainings and in our methodologies. Essentially, when we look at grief and bereavement, traditionally we've looked at it in a way that says the goal of therapy is to let go of the person who has died, to a certain sense, move on. And what Helping Parents Heal, from what I can gather, you all do this very differently. You all honor the contact, the communication that you've had with your departed children, and you gather in groups and you talk about it, and you support one another, and you share with each other. This, in my mind, is the future of grief and bereavement counseling. The field that I am trained in is, I believe, is missing out on the gold of the human experience. And so I could get in trouble with my licensing authorities on this one, but I really do believe, I have my own experiences, I'm going to share them with you in a second, that there is such an increasing volume of research and data about such topics as after-death communication, that it is hard to deny that relationships with our departed loved ones is not only possible, I believe as our culture opens up to this, it is probable and will become the way of healing going forward. Said differently, human death ends a life, a human life, but it does not end a relationship. Indeed, the relationship goes on, and while it is not in the human form, it is up for all of us to shape and craft that relationship and open ourselves to the vast possibilities that exist, beyond this realm, through this realm, across time and space. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me so you get a sense for who I am. Of course, my slide is not advancing. All right, so let me see what's going on here. I'm going to call over my tech, Katie. I wonder if I have sufficient control over this. How can I get this to?
I think you should, but if it's creating problems, I think what you need to be doing is clicking on. I just did it. Okay.
I figured it out, but it was in this is a different interface. So anyway, we're good to go here. Thank you, Elizabeth. So let me tell you just a little bit about me. So I had my first near-death experience at 17 years old, and it was a high-speed skiing accident. And what happened was I just caught an edge, skiing rather briskly down a mountain, and I catapulted into the air. And when I landed, I crushed my spine. And I was catapulted out of my body. And the next thing I remember was I was looking down at my body and Squaw Valley, USA, International Ski Area in Lake Tahoe. And then I saw the Rocky Mountains and the San Francisco Bay and the Pacific and the Atlantic. And it was beautiful. I was in complete bliss. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. But then as I sailed away from the earth and I saw Earth more going into the distance and I saw other planets coming into view, I realized that I was dying. And it was a classic near-death experience. I saw my life go before me. I went in a tunnel. I was traveling in this tunnel, and then I saw this beautiful light. And when I saw this beautiful light, I realized, oh, that's God. I grew up Catholic, so I said, oh my God, God, I don't want to die. Do not let me die. So I pled with this benevolent, loving force, and I actually went deeply into the light, was fully ensconced in it, and I still wanted to return. And that's, if you look at the near-death experience literature, that's unusual to want to return. Most people are so, if you will, enthralled by the experience that they would prefer not to return. In my case, I wanted to return, and I started returning, kind of spinning back to Earth, if you will, because I was kind of like rotating. And I did that whole experience in reverse, tunnel, then could see the solar system, and then could see my life going again, and then saw the Earth, and I came back into my body. That experience I never talked about for 10 years, but it changed me. And it changed me because I was, grew up in a upper middle class, suburban family, went to prep school, and then I went to college, and I had this realization that I just did not want to do what the rest of my contemporaries were doing. And so I found myself, my first job was working in Central America in Belize, teaching a very poor part of Belize. I was teaching high school. And after that job, I went down to Peru and worked with refugees from the civil war that was occurring in the mid-'80s in Peru. And it was here that I was introduced to shamanic culture and this notion that we go on, that life, this human life is kind of a dream, and yet you go on after this notion that there's some enduring aspect of ourselves that continues, and they call it journeys from dimension to dimension of sorts. And this really stuck with me because I was dealing with so much pain and suffering during the Civil War, so much poverty in southern Peru. But the shamans that I met were so at peace with all of this, so at peace with the grief, the suffering, the civil unrest, and outright battling with arms with the government that the indigenous people were experiencing. And so their peace really stuck with me. When I returned from Peru, I took a position in San Francisco at the St. Anthony's Foundation as a social worker. They hired me because I was fluent in Spanish. And there was a great deal of refugees coming in from Central and South America at that time. But what happened when I was there was what we now call the AIDS epidemic broke out. It literally just spilled out all over San Francisco. Many, mostly gay men were dying really ugly deaths. You know, these were very, their skin would get all inflamed with Kaposi sarcoma. And these were just really brutally painful deaths. And I was invited into these communities mostly because I actually had free food to give them. And that's how it started. But then I was very curious about their experiences. And I was actually wanted to help. I was very interested in how it is that you can make sense of and stay positive in the midst of such horrific suffering. And so I'll never forget my 3+ years working with these communities. Soon after that, I had a second near-death experience. I had a blood imbalance, most likely from my time in Central America. I had a compromised immune system and found myself floating above an ICU at Kaiser Hospital. And it was very interesting. It was not a full-blown near-death experience because I was still very much in this dimension. I was just hovering above the ICU. I was listening to the nurses. I was listening to the janitorial staff. And I was wandering like I said, on this 10th floor of this ICU, down the halls, listening to conversations. And it really taught me that I am not this body. That was the thing that I realized. In fact, at one point, the attending physician came in the middle of the night, and he looked at my body, and I was above kind of watching him saying, geez, I wonder what he's doing over there. And then he called out my name, and I said, oh my gosh, that's me down there. And I had no idea that I was that physical body, but I was on a tether. And so that experience was yet another profound transformation for me, really loosening or teaching me that whatever this experience is that we're having right now as human beings is not the totality of our existence. With my fascination in death and dying, I joined the hospice project, the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. It was at the time and remains one of the most progressive hospices in the world. It has a Buddhist background to it. And it was there that on one afternoon on a ward, I was attending to a man named Ron who was dying. And I was reading him a story. And as I was reading him the story, in the midst of that reading of that story, I popped out of my body and I was suspended with Ron above our bodies. And I could see his face in bold. I still have that memory. He just looked at me with a big smile and as if to say, check this out. Look at where we are. And so my sense is, that he had kind of invited me there. I don't know how that all works. It's kind of one of the focuses of our study, which I'll share with you in a moment. But I would have many more experiences like this. And these are what we call shared death experiences. These are experiences where somebody is dying and a caregiver or loved one expresses that they feel like they shared in the transition of the dying, or in many cases express that they went into the initial stages of the afterlife with their departing loved ones. And that's what I had in part, just the first part of that with Ron, and I would have many more of those at Zen Hospice. So the history of the Shared Crossing Project, briefly cover this. So I met Raymond Moody in 2009, and he is the first person in the United States really to bring awareness to the shared death experience. And he wrote a book in 2009 called Glimpses of Eternity. And when I met Raymond, the first time I came up to him after one of his talks and said, I've had these experiences in hospice. I've never heard anybody identify them as you have. And I said, but more than that, I think I can develop protocols to facilitate these, because they're such wonderful experiences. When caregivers and loved ones can have a shared death experience, it totally transforms their sense of grief and loss. And he looked at me and says, you're absolutely right. He says, but no one has any idea how these experiences are happening, but I'm happy to support you. In fact, let's stay in touch and you keep me posted. Well, I started developing protocols, and the way I developed these protocols was really that the protocols kind of landed in me. Sometimes we get these downloads of information that comes into us. And I started trying them out first with friends and family, and then eventually with clients who were interested in this. And I had an experience in 2012, and this was with a family friend. We'll call her Sandy. Sandy was dying of ovarian cancer, and she wanted to learn these protocols. She read Raymond Moody's book. She said, I'd love to give my kids this shared death experience. And I said, well, let's bring them on. I can train you guys up in this, because usually I train the person dying and caregivers' loved ones. But she said, well, my kids aren't interested, and neither is my husband, in anything this spiritual. So I said, okay, well, I'll train you then. And I did. So I trained her in our protocols. And these are kind of only half of the protocols, because we usually do them together. And 2 weeks later, actually less than that, 9 days later, her daughter called me and said, hey, William, I know you were working with my mom, but I want to share this experience I had with you on the night that she died. I was down the hall from my mother, and in the middle of that night, I felt awoken and a pull upon my body that scared me. It was pulling me out of my bed. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to die. But then I looked out and I saw this little being with blonde hair. I thought, oh my gosh, that's my child. I've got to go out and get him. And so she went out in her own way to to get this child. And when she gets next to this being, the being turns around and it is her mother. Her mother says to her, "You see that I'm alive and well. I will be with you always. Go back and live your life. I will be in touch with you as much as I can." And with that experience, I realized that we had some protocols that might be useful to people. So we started the Shared Crossing Project. And in starting the Shared Crossing Project, we started offering, this is the mission of it, I should say, to raise awareness and educate people about the profound and healing experiences available to the dying and their loved ones. And with that, we started doing, I did a lot of programs here in Santa Barbara. I didn't know how much interest there would be in these programs, preparing people for what we call conscious, connected, and loving end-of-life experiences, and an exploration of what the literature tells us about what happens when we die. Well, I started doing groups, and I couldn't do enough groups for the population here. I literally had 10 groups over the next couple years, often with 20 people in a group. So it was very popular here. And the conversations of people sharing their experiences were quite moving. So in 2013, we began the Shared Crossing Research Initiative. And this is when our formal research began. It first focused on whether the methods that we had developed could facilitate a shared death experience. And we found that they did, in fact, about 50% of the people that we worked with would actually have a shared death experience when they were at the death of a loved one. 80% would have other types of experiences, which I'll refer to in a moment. And then in 2018, we decided to do a more robust study because we realized that we really needed to understand these shared death experiences better. So we began collecting and documenting shared death experiences. And to date, we have over 200 written accounts. These are fully developed written accounts, and 100 video interviews, of which Elizabeth is one of our candidates. We interviewed Elizabeth, I think, a month or two ago. So, and these are quite long interviews. They're usually 45 minutes to an hour. And we are going to, we have a library, but we're going to be putting this online. We're developing the technology for that. So hopefully by the beginning of 2021, this will be available to everyone to view. Okay, so here's the team, just so you see us. You see Dr. Michael Kinsella on the left and our medical director, Dr. Monica Williams. I'm in the middle, and then Noelle, our researcher, and Katie, some of you saw earlier, she's our administrator. So this is a rather small team, and we have more accounts than we can process, although at some point I'm going to ask you all to consider sharing with us, because we really would like to hear more about shared crossings experienced by parents with their children. That is I don't need to tell you, these are very profound experiences, very moving, heartbreaking for many, but the shared death experience has the potential of recasting these deaths in a certain way. Okay, so here's the fundamental question. Now that we are doing this talk right now in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and these are the questions that people are asking as loved ones are not able to be with their dying loved ones who have COVID. I can tell you, I get many, many inquiries about this, and our data is pretty clear that no one dies alone, and I'm going to substantiate that as we go through this talk. So here's the points for tonight. I'm going to introduce the Shared Crossing Project Spectrum of End-of-Life Experience. We call this SAELE for short. And this is a series of experiences that begin before death, things like pre-death premonition, pre-death dreams, and then at the moment of death, shared death experience, and then all the forms of after-death communication. We're going to show you a very user-friendly map, if you will. And then we're going to talk about the common effects if you have these experiences. And then I'm going to talk about a new theory for grief. It's called continuing bonds. It's something that you all, from what I understand from your groups, are already doing. And I foresee you guys as ambassadors to providing the data for researchers who are going to be studying, hey, how does this continuing bonds therapy work? Like I said, I think you guys are doing it already, but we'll talk more about that. So here's the shared crossing spectrum of end-of-life experiences. And I'll just take a moment to let this, to work with this chart a little bit. What you'll see on the horizontal axis is a timeline. The timeline begins with approaching death, death itself, and then after death. And you see that we have death not as a unitary time and space. We have it spread out, because what we have found in our research is that the experience of death and dying actually can take place over minutes, hours, and sometimes days. And I'll share some cases with you just to demonstrate that. On the vertical axis, you'll see phenomena that we'll be covering that we think is the dominant, if you will. These are handles for the most common experiences at end of life. And pre-death premonitions, pre-death dreams and visions, pre-death synchronicities, terminal lucidity. We'll just find all of these. Shared death experience I just mentioned, but we'll go over it in a little more detail. Direct post-death communication. This is a communication that happens right after or soon after the death of a loved one. It's an early form of after-death communication. Post-death synchronicities and post-death dreams and visions. All right, so we're going to begin with pre-death premonitions. And you know, these are really, I think you all know what this means. This is like a precognition regarding one's own death or the death of a loved one. And it can also be the death of the premonition of a impending death of anyone in your life, actually, but the most common ones have a high relationship content. And it's interesting that Dalai Lama says that recognition of one's own death is common around 2 years in advance, so long as you have a real conscious practice, a mindfulness practice. So this is a fruit of being quite mindful. And what's important about pre-death premonitions, and as well as other pre-death dreams and post-death dreams and visions, is that these are very clear. They may happen at times when you're sleeping in a sleep state, but the quality of these experiences are dramatically different than typical dream life. Typical dream life it can be fragmented, incoherent, mixed up, distorted. When you get a pre-death premonition, it's usually really clear, really coherent, and the message is not to be missed. So we are going to hear Adam talk about a pre-death premonition he had with his brother. This will be an audio only. The rest of the case studies I'll have tonight will be video, but this is an audio. So I'm going to turn this on. What you need to know is Adam is going to be talking about his experience when he was a young man. I believe he's either 19 or in his early 20s. And he's in Zermatt, Switzerland, and he's in a chalet the night before he's going to go skiing with his brother. So listen in, and I think it should start right up.
This is a testimonial from Adam Marks at the ADEC conference, and he will be talking about his pre-death premonition with his brother in Zermatt, Switzerland, now 30 years ago. So here's Adam.
So my brother and I had taken the train to Zermatt, and the next day we're going to ski Zermatt. We're going to go glacier skiing. It was the summer of 1985. The two of us are staying in a little pension, so twin beds. We go to bed, and in the middle of the night, all of a sudden I kind of just like sit straight up, and I'm terrified. And I'm not sure why, and I'm looking over at my brother, who's sound asleep, and I'm checking whether he's breathing. I'm just, for some reason, I'm terrified, and I don't know why. And because he's obviously fine, nothing else is going on, I go back to sleep. And the next day, we're on the slope in Zermatt, and my brother decides to ski, off trail, skis off a cliff and breaks his neck. He's dead at the scene. And so I had a premonition that that's what was going to happen. I just didn't know it at the time. And certainly,
this is a testimonial from Adam.
Okay, so that is a pre-death premonition. Happens the night before. Quite a tragic story, but I know Adam, and he has used this experience to shape the rest of his life in a very meaningful way. So that's the pre-death premonition. So let us now move up to this other phenomenon called pre-death dreams and visions. And so these are really well known in anthropological studies. Throughout time, cultures have used these dreams as signs or harbingers of someone's death. And they usually provide comfort to the dying. And when the dying can share these with their caregivers or loved ones, the loved ones can find support in these as well. Currently, Dr. Christopher Kerr of Hospice of Buffalo is a leading researcher on these. In fact, he came out with a book in February this year called Death is But a Dream. And his research asserts that 80% of the patients in inpatient care have these pre-death dreams and visions. And it's the usual reports are either a known deceased loved one or some benevolent angel or guardian appears, very comforting, and really tells them that you'll be dying soon, get ready, it's all going to be well, we're taking care of it, and there's nothing to worry about. Unfortunately, these have historically been misunderstood in modern medicine, but we're hoping with increased research that this will change. The case that we're going to share with you today is from David, and David is going to share a story with his father. So his father is dying, and this is what David experienced.
As time went on, I would go into the room and I would sleep with him sometimes in the bed. He went from being quite large to being quite small, and the hospital bed, and I just lie there with him. And sometimes he'd have conversations with people I didn't know what he was doing, but there were people up in the corners of the room, toward the ceiling. And you would see his mouth moving, and he would be gesticulating as if he's actually having the conversation. And I said, Dad, who are you talking to? At one point, he wrote down Cy, and that was his best friend who had passed away about 10 years ago, who was he wasn't a true blood uncle, but we called him Uncle Cy. And I said, how's Cy doing? And my dad said, he's doing, he could gesture with his one. And I said, what are you guys talking about? He says, all kinds of things. And then he started having conversations with different people in the room, always up in the corners of the room. And I said, are they just up there? I mean, are they down here too? He says, no, just right up there. And at one point, he started to introduce me to somebody. And I said, is it Uncle Cy? He says, no. I said, do you know this person? He says, no. I said, what do you want me to say to him? He just tells the guy, this other person, this is my elder son. I'd like you to meet my elder son. He grabs my hand, and my right hand, and he wants me to shake hands with this being that I can't see and I don't hear, I have no relationship with, but it's very, very clear that my dad's having this conversation, and he wants me to be able to be introduced formally to this man and to say hi. And so I said, hello, it's nice to meet you. I wish I could hear you. I wish I could know what's going on between you, but my father seems comforted and seems to be able to have a real clear relationship with you. And then my dad kind of went like this, like there's not just him, there's others. So he wanted me to introduce myself to other people around the room that were there. And then every night he would have these conversations, mostly happened at night.
So this is a really wonderful pre-death vision. These aren't really dreams. They're happening in a sleep state, but usually. But what's interesting about this one is this is happening during waking state. So his father is communicating with David about what he's experiencing. We don't get a lot of cases like these. These are wonderful because you can see that the dying are communicating, if you will, across the veil. And then he's able to share it with his son in such a meaningful way. And like I said, this is a rather unique case, but quite profound in its teaching. And you can see David is such a articulate person about the experience.
As time went on,
Okay. So now we're gonna go to pre-death synchronicities, right up here. So pre-death synchronicities, these are events that are interpreted as signs from the dying, or often they're seen as some sort of kind, benevolent force is doing something to signify that death is coming and that everything's okay. Oftentimes, the experiencer will interpret unusual natural phenomena in a certain way. Synchronistic events get their attention. Sometimes it's, bird behavior, or I live in Santa Barbara. We have all sorts of people they share stories about mammals doing amazing things on the beach for them. And they say, I've never seen that. I was thinking of my dying father, and then all of a sudden I see this amazing display of dolphins that I've been walking on this beach my whole life, and all of a sudden there are, hundreds of dolphins dancing over the water. Also, electronic devices start and stop at very auspicious times. Sometimes a clock will stop at the birth date or a significant date of an anniversary or something similar. So I'm gonna show you one of these cases from our research. This is from Mary Beth, and Mary Beth was an active member in our community. She splits time between Santa Barbara and Montana. And this is a bi-coastal synchronicity. So Mary Beth's father is dying in Florida, and Mary Beth is with her brother and sister-in-law walking somewhere in town a few days before Christmas, and they're not with her father because he's in bed dying. And then her husband is in Santa Barbara, California, but you'll hear the story.
It was New Year's Day evening, about 9 p.m. in Fort Lauderdale. My dad was still in the hospital. We couldn't get him home for another couple of days to die. And I was walking down the street with my brother and my sister-in-law. It was about 9 o'clock at night. And we've never done this before. This was a one-off. That's another story. But the three of us were walking down the street arm in arm, and Christmas lights are on, street lights are on. And my sister-in-law, Patty, says, we were talking about what was going on, and Patty said, well, we all know Dad has orchestrated it all. And at that moment, all the lights went off on the street, all the Christmas lights went off, and the phone in my brother's pocket started to ring. I mean, it all happened like that. And we were shrieking, going, okay, this is my dad. So we're all in this together. We're just hooting and hollering. And the person who called was Lucy, his caretaker, who was his most beloved person. And so she was in on it, and we were all just enjoying Dad's energy, saying, this is my thing. So I go home. Tony's in California. My husband's in California. I go home to tell him this story. I call him up an hour later, and he said, well, guess what happened here? He said, I was having dinner with our friends at 6 o'clock, East Coast time, and there's a flash in the sky, and all the lights in the house went out. And I said, I love it. I said, my dad brought you in, so you can be in this too. So it is bi-coastal phenomena going on. And anyhow, so that was great.
So there you see a synchronistic event, and the lights flashing and lights going off on bi-coastally. And once again, these are up to the interpretation of the experiencer. A lot of people would just say, oh, it's coincidence. But, you know, we get so many of these accounts. My researcher, Dr. Michael Kinsella, is quite conservative on these matters. And at this point, you know, he is completely convinced with the literally hundreds of accounts we have just of pre-death synchronicities, that it's very difficult to discount that there's some force at play trying to get our attention. Okay, so now we're up to terminal lucidity. So terminal lucidity, this is a well-recognized phenomenon in medical science. And it happens at the end of life, just before someone's dying, typically. So I'm going to read the definition to you because it just kind of helps to take this in. It's the dying exhibit behaviors or capacities, often in the form of coherent communication, that were assumed to have been permanently lost. So these are behaviors or capacities that by the study of medical science has rendered them physiologically impossible. So these are things like persons with Alzheimer's who have been in a semi-coma or completely unresponsive state for some period of time, wake up and start talking with the people around the room, around their bed, and asking them specific questions about their life that lead you to believe that they have been with you and following the events of your life nonstop and for the last few weeks, if not months, if not years. And these types of experiences lead the caregivers to naturally say, oh, I think Papa's coming back to life. Well, when in fact, it is just the opposite. Terminal lucidity is a harbinger for death. It is, in folklore, they call it lightning before the storm. It's just this last hurrah before people, the dying, actually begin their transition. One of the features that is quite profound is a glow in the eyes. It's as if there's light that's shining through their eyes. There's a luminescence in their eyes. Some hospice workers are aware of this. I found this when I was working in hospice, that there was this light that would start to be emanating from the inside out. There's a little bit of sound in the background. I'm wondering where that's coming from. Can you hear that, Elizabeth? Yeah. And so the photo I have here is of Steve Jobs. And if you remember when Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computer Company, said, just as he was dying, this is reported by his sister, Mona Simpson, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. And she looked at him and she could see his eyes fixated way out into the distance, like not in anything in the room. And she could feel that he was in touch with something incredibly grand. So that's terminal lucidity. And one of the reasons for the importance of terminal lucidity is because it's really important, I think, and I think those of us who work in end of life, to have some general awareness of terminal lucidity, because then you realize that your window to say goodbye is closing. That is the time that you need to really express your love and gratitude and anything else you need to say to your loved ones, and not be taken up in the lucidity of the moment, because it will not last. Okay, now we're at the shared death experience. I've already defined this. But let's go over it again. This, as I've mentioned before, is really the focal point historically for the Shared Crossing Project. We got into the shared death experience because I thought this was the most profound experience, that there was very little research on. Like I said, only Raymond Moody had even done, he wrote a book based on 50 some odd letters, not research, just personal letters that he received about these experiences, because they're remarkably similar to the near-death experience. So the experience occurs between a person dying and his or her loved ones or caregivers. They can appear at bedside, or you can be remote. In fact, our research has found that 60% of our more than 200 shared death experience accounts happen remotely. So distance is no impediment to these experiences. And the living or the caregiver is convinced that they have witnessed or accompanied the dying during their initial experiences immediately following death. And this assumes the continuation of life, of consciousness for the dying. So the example, the case study we're going to see this evening is with Amelia. And Amelia is going to be sharing a shared death experience she had with her son, Tom, who is 13 years old at this time. Tom was diagnosed at 10 years old with a juvenile terminal cancer. And after 3 years of painful struggles, he finally died. And so Amelia is, you'll notice from her accent, she is from just outside London. Our study is international. We have people give us accounts from all over the world. And so this is Amelia.
Tom was sleeping, he'd moved downstairs, so he was sleeping on a sort of hospital bed, and I was snuggled up next to him. He was just breathing very, very gently, just a very gentle breath. So I set my head right next to him to feel his breath. And I closed my eyes. And then it's hard, if you close your eyes and you try and imagine something, like if I close my eyes now and I try and imagine a sea, I have to conjure it up. I can do it. Like you're using something in your brain, you're using a cognitive thing, aren't you? So if you close your eyes now and try and imagine something, you're using a bit of your brain to think, I'm going to see the sea, and you go to somewhere that you've seen and then you see yourself. But you can almost feel your brain working. I can, to do that. But this wasn't like that. I closed my eyes and it was there. So it was like closing your eyes, and as you close your eyes, simultaneously somebody switches on a video. But it was just there. I didn't ask for it to come there. I didn't expect it to be there. I certainly wasn't thinking about anything spiritual. I wasn't praying or anything. I was just utterly focused on Tom's breathing. And so I just closed my eyes, and there instantaneously, immediately, was this video, like a scene, so clearly that I can remember it so clearly now. And it was a woman walking towards what I thought was me. I didn't think of Tom. So I wasn't really thinking of Tom. When I was watching her, I completely wasn't thinking about Tom, which is why when I came out of it, I thought, oh, Tom, what was I doing? You know, because I just saw her, and I just remember watching her like I watched a film, and I thought, she's a beautiful young woman. She's so beautiful. And I remember thinking, actually, I must remember this. I must remember this. I must remember that she's beautiful. And she had a pale face and a sort of slightly pointy chin, so her face was like a heart with very pronounced cheekbones. She wasn't anybody I recognised, although I wish I could say I think it was. I can't. She had dark hair that was sort of like women wore in the 70s. She was wearing a gown, and it was one that kind of crossed over, and it had like a tie, you know, a proper gown. It was like in white. And I think she might have been holding something in her hand, but that I couldn't remember at the time. I was thinking, I wish I'd looked harder. I just wonder if she was holding something. The main thing I remember thinking about her is, gosh, she needs to get somewhere. She's urgent, she's purposeful. And I remember thinking, but she's not running, she's not late. It's not like she's like, I'm sometimes late for a meeting, like out of breath. Or it was just that she had a look in her eyes like, I must be there at this time. But it was sort of somehow really important to me that I knew that she had to be at a certain place at a certain time, and that she was going to make sure that she got there. And then I looked what she was walking through, and it was a tunnel. I find it really difficult to describe that tunnel because it was dark, but there was light shining through it. And it wasn't like, if I looked at the walls of that tunnel, it wasn't brick or cement. It was like air, but it was solid. So the only way I can kind of think of comparing it to would be like a cloud. When you see a cloud looks quite solid, a dark storm cloud, but you can see the sun behind the cloud trying to break through. I knew there was a white light outside the tunnel. Out of the corner of my eye, I could almost see this incredibly intense white light. And I knew that white light was really good. And I knew when I looked at the dark tunnel, I thought, oh, it's a dark tunnel, but I knew everything was okay because there was this intense white light outside it and coming through it. And she was just coming closer and closer to us. And I think I opened my eyes and it all just disappeared.
Okay, so there is Amelia's account of the moment of death of her son, Tom. And, you know, those of you who are familiar with near-death experiences will notice a similarity. And those of us who research near-death experiences and shared-death experiences find that the phenomena are, while each experience is unique, the range of phenomena are quite similar, if not identical. And what's so lovely about this example is she speaks of this beautiful woman in white. And that woman seems to have a purpose, a mission. We see this quite a bit when these, you know, oftentimes they're called beings of light or mysterious beings, but they come with a sense of purpose and mission. And, you know, I think that they are coming because they're guides. I feel like they are some part of the transition team that's going to, in this case, help Amelia's son, Tom, go from this dimension to what lies beyond. And then you see these other features, the tunnel, the light shining through. These are all kind of part of the landscape that our research has revealed, and very common. So, and you'll see that Amelia, very much at peace now. She's a very, she's got a sense of settledness about the loss of her beloved son. And you probably, some of you who are listening might know this feeling, and she attributes some of this to the shared death experience. And she has not had a good deal of communication with Tom since, but this experience so touched her deeply that she knew there was something going on and that there's something about Tom that would continue and that she would see him again. Okay, and I should say we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you're here, if questions are arising, please just jot them down. I just want to get through the bulk of my talk because I can get tangential rather easily, and I'd rather do my presentation, then we can go in whatever direction moves you all.
Tom was sleeping.
Okay, so wanted to say a thing about shared death experiences in children. When we looked at your profile, you have a profile of your leaders on your the pictures and descriptions of people. We just did a little quick study. Actually, our researcher, Dr. Michael Kinsella, was curious. We all were curious about who you all are. And what we found was, this is what we have. Well, we found that the majority of you all, at least as presented in that description in your bios there, had lost sons. Most were women and most had lost sons. And we at the Shared Crossing Project, we found that all but one of our cases, I shouldn't say that. Most of our cases involve mothers and their sons. That's the most dominant presentation. I mean, literally 80% of our cases are mothers with sons. And dare I say, this is not research as much as observation and curiosity. Many of you all seem to have that in your community, this mother and son combination. So we're very interested in exploring this, and we don't know what to make of it, but our curiosity is piqued. We think there's something going on here. Okay, let's move on now we're going to do direct post-death communication. This is a form of after-death communication. But here's how we've looked at this. This is what we've seen in our data. Occurs soon after the death of a loved one. The frequency and duration vary, but it tends to begin soon after the death of a loved one, and kind of after a few months, it declines quite precipitously. The experiencer recognizes the departed loved one as the sender of these communications. And they also recognize the purpose. There is a purpose for these communications. And then the communication at some point ceases, or at least tails off and becomes a lot less frequent. When we compare this to after-death communication, as many of you know, after-death communication can happen anytime after the death of a loved one. We're really focused in that period soon after a death. And once it gets on more than 6 months, half a year, we're not as focused on it because we're interested in what this has to say about death and dying in general. And most of the communications we get really do, in some ways, they're quite simple. We have examples where a person will be, preparing their eulogy or the funeral, and all of a sudden the departed loved one will come right into their mind and say, I want you to say this in my eulogy. I want this person to be seated over here. I want you to wear this. And by the way, you've been looking for this. It's located in the third drawer to the left. So there's that type of specificity in this direct post-death communication that is quite stunning and remarkable. So the case that we're going to share this evening is Anne, and she's going to be sharing an example when her father died. And her father dies and then comes back to her in a quite direct form. You'll see that he calls her on the telephone, and you may think, you've got to be kidding me. Well, we have a half dozen of these cases. So, I mean, it takes me back even because it is so powerful. So here we go with Anne.
A week later, in the middle of the night, he didn't send a bird. He called me on the phone. It wasn't a dream. I was definitely awake. He said, hello, my precious Gem. That's what he always called me because we were both Geminis, and Gem was a double entendre for being a Gemini and his precious jewel. I was speechless, and he knew it. He said, it's okay, Annie. Once I could speak, I said, how are you? He said, all is well. I'm just so sorry that I had to leave you, Mom, and your sister. I said, where are you? He said, I am here now. I knew that he had merged with the eternal now that connects the past, present, and future. I asked, why did you have to go? He said, I was called here to help others go through the same process that I just went through. Thank you for your help. There are many that are passing over now and need my help to go through what you helped me go through. I told him, I love you. He said, I love you, and I will always be with you. And he's kept his word to me. I feel him always. He's one of my best friends and guardian angels. Anytime I really need him and call for him, he comes. After he passed away, my mom.
Okay, so this is Anne's example of direct post-death communication. As you can see, it can't get much more direct than a phone line. And you can see the impact it has on Anne. And she has had continued conversation with her father, although it has tailed off. She tells another story about her singing to her father at his funeral, and then all of a sudden him coming to her and telling her to sing some other verses as well. So amazing the communication that goes on after human death. So now we're at post-death synchronicities. And these are very similar to pre-death synchronicities. There's things like time significance, clocks stopping for auspicious times, bells chiming. Once again, I mentioned this before, you know, birth dates and anniversary dates, important dates appear on digital clocks. Some electronic devices start and stop. Music goes on and off. Oftentimes, the favorite songs of departed loved ones come on the radio. I believe, Elizabeth, you talk about seeing a red pickup truck. Am I right about that, Elizabeth? That Morgan reminds you of Morgan? These are very common post-death synchronicities. Also, remarkable animal behavior. We hear this all the time. We live, you know, living in Santa Barbara, we have a lot of sea life here, as I mentioned, with mammals doing synchronistic behaviors. Also, birds flying in certain formations. So those are just a few of the synchronistic events. You know, we also hear butterflies and hummingbirds and all of that. These are replete in our research. The account we're going to hear today is perhaps one of the most spectacular accounts I have ever heard. This happens locally in Santa Barbara. This is Mike Degree, who died in an aviation accident and died tragically. And what you're going to be hearing is the eulogy from his brother, Frank, in Santa Barbara. You'll notice that the powerful scene takes place on one of our beaches. And I want you to listen very closely to the description that Frank gives for Mike's life, like how he describes him, and that will become relevant and evident as we see the video.
He had friends everywhere. I'll wager most of you have said at some time, "What a great guy." You've got outrageous stories about him, and he has funny stories about you. His enthusiasm, his excitement, this beautiful silver hair and that unfortunate haircut. His sense of wonder. Terry Ellis described Mike as a human exclamation mark. And I think clouds away in the brightness of day. I like the dark and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking and I see, how do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like the lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh star, where over the rainbow, way up high.
So I'm going to go to the next slide. So you heard the description of Mike in the eulogy as a human exclamation point or a human exclamation mark. And this is what over 1,000 people saw as they gathered on the beach after the memorial service. This, in my mind, is one of the most profound, spectacular, awe-inspiring post-death synchronicities I've ever seen. And I am very good friends with the family, worked with his widow for many years. So she shared this with me. And in fact, if you're interested, there is a film on his life. It's called Diving Deep by Mike Degree. It's really a great film about his life, spectacular man. Okay, so let's move on. And the last element or feature in our spectrum of end-of-life experiences is post-death dreams and visions. So, you know, these typically happen during what we call sleep state, but they're not dreams. People will say, they'll say, well, I had a dream, and we ask them, well, was it a dream? They go, well, actually, it wasn't like a dream at all. It was more coherent, more clear, and there was a real message that I understood for this vision. It's usually better described as a vision or visitation. So, and to be clear, and there was a study in 2014 on post-death dreams and visions. They found that with the 300 people, the bereaved, those who had lost loved ones, in a random sample study, 58% had reported having some sort of communication or visitation or dream that they felt was their loved one returning to tell them something. And usually what they're coming to tell them is they're okay. In fact, they're doing really, really well, and that they love them, and that they should live their life fully, and that they'll see them again. So this case is with Francis. So Francis is somebody who did one of our training programs. We call it the Pathway, Share Crossing Pathway program. And it's his mother happened to be, at the time, the teacher of my daughter, who at the time was in 2nd grade. And so I knew Diana, my daughter's teacher in the Waldorf school, very well. She was a lovely woman from Britain, from just outside London. And so Diana and Francis did our group preparing for what we call a conscious, connected, and loving end-of-life experience, and the hope of having a shared death experience. Well, what Francis will tell you is that he's disappointed that he didn't have a shared death experience. His sister did, who was at the bedside, but he was in the kitchen making a phone call at the time she died, and he didn't have it. So you'll see this little bit of disappointment in him, but then he shares this wonderful vision or visitation.
I knelt down and I held her hand, and I said, please bring me now to the place where you are going. I want to know that you're okay. And I felt a sense of warmth, but that was it. It didn't, and so I thought, okay, I failed somehow, you know? I failed. I really thought like it was going to be a whoosh, and I was going to kind of travel into this kind of cosmic realm and going to, you know, see this place, and it's going to have like a level of closure, a level of finality. But it didn't happen. About, I would say, a month later, I was lying in bed. I was not asleep. It was, my girlfriend had gone to sleep, and I was lying there. I've suffered from insomnia much of my life. And I'm lying there and sort of in a kind of that twilight state of, you know, going into somewhat of a sleep, but not really. And I start seeing this Arctic environment. It was, and I felt it too. It was just very, very vivid. And I suddenly saw my mother. I knew it was her, didn't exactly look like her. And she was seated and in this place of kind of reverence, almost like a queen. And she did actually, she came from aristocratic lineage. She was very closely related to the Queen Mother and Scottish aristocracy. So she's seated on this kind of throne, and there were all these people around her kneeling. And there she was, this sort of royal figure, if you will. And it was very, very vivid. It was very, very real. And I, in hindsight now, I think that was the moment. That was her bringing me to, you know, the place, letting me, hey, I'm okay. I'm doing okay here.
So there you have a post-death vision. Notice that he was not sleeping. He was, I believe he was just about to go to bed. And that's a time when we just going to sleep and just waking up in the morning, hypnopompic and hypnagogic states of mind. If you look at psychology, we recognize these as very almost transcendental states. You can access certain realms or experiences that are considered non-ordinary. There's different language for these experiences, but point being is he had this vision of his mother that let him know that everything was okay and that she was fine. And what's curious is that another good friend had the exact same dream that night, or vision that night, of her similarly as a queen in an Arctic ice castle of sorts. So that was very evidential and confirming for him. Okay, so we have now finished. This is our whole, covered each phenomena here. So I want to say a few more things about this, and then we'll open up for questions. So the common effects or therapeutic benefits for loved ones who experience, now this is for shared death experiences. We've only tracked this for shared death experiences, not for the whole continuum of experiences, but our hypothesis is that they're very similar. So for the shared death experience, we hear that a feeling of peace, knowing that the one who has died is doing well, they're fine. In fact, we often hear that they're doing extremely well. They also report a certainty of an afterlife, a sense that they go on, their loved one has gone on, but they too will go on. There's a reduction, indeed there's elimination of any death anxiety, and it's very similar to the near-death experiences. There's just that apprehension or fear of death just goes away, no longer there. There's also this very positive impact around refocusing on one's purpose in this life. There's a sense that this life has meaning, that they need to get about living and manifesting their life's purpose, whatever that may be. And so oftentimes we see relationships change or end, people change professional careers, people dedicate themselves often to higher causes and things like Elizabeth is doing. I would imagine that you would directly relate this to the loss of one or both of your children. This is very much what we see. And then the other piece of this is this enhanced capacity to reconcile grief. And I think this is where your community really gets what we're talking about. When you have these profound experiences with your departing loved ones, this communication or contact or sense of knowing that your loved one, your departed child in most of your cases, is alive and well somewhere, that recontextualizes grief. And so we're gonna go to continuing bonds. This is a model of grief therapy that started in the 90s, and has been very slow to gather steam or support within the psychotherapeutic community. The reason why is because it asserts a continuation of a relationship beyond human death, and that requires a fundamental shift in our thinking about grief, which I spoke to in the introduction here today. Rather than focusing on the letting go of the person who has died, continuing bonds emphasizes the reshaping and transformation of this relationship. And while it changes and transforms, the meaning remains and in many cases deepens. In many cases deepens. This is continuing bonds. It is a therapy that I believe will become more and more mainstream in the coming years. It is just right in the last few years, it's gotten more popular. There's a new book that came out, an anthology of therapists commenting on continuing bonds. It came out in 2018. So I want to say something else. Once again, I think you guys are doing this. When you do these continuing bond groups, one thing that we've learned in our research is the sharing of these stories, of these shared crossing experiences, have inherent transformative power for the person who expresses and shares. It's very therapeutic for them to share about these experiences, their relationship with the loved one, but only if it's well received. So you need to choose the right people with whom to share, and this is why Helping Parents Heal is so important, because you guys have created the guidelines, the protocols, the safety, the inclusion, all the, what we call the therapeutic setting that enables the deepening into the experiences, the connecting with others around them, and the affirming of the experience and everybody in the group. So yes, and this also helps to normalize these experiences. So our aspiration is that this map, that this shared crossing spectrum of end-of-life experiences can be a tool that people use just not only to validate their experiences to others in the therapeutic or medical community who may not trust or believe in their experience, because we now have the research to support it, but also it gives people a map, because as we all know, death happens to everyone we know and love. And so we're getting lots of opportunities to be with our loved ones through this map of life and after they die as well. So, by way of closure on this, we've presented this, we call it SELE, it's the Spectrum End-of-Life Experiences. We really hope that this map will be used. We do know that there are a lot of researchers who are now using this map and adding more and more data to it. But as you see in the last bullet point, when these experiences are normalized, they can be better processed and integrated into the lives of the experiencers. And these result in very positive states of being. We call this well-being. And I think you see that in your community with the very unique and unprecedented positivity and good feeling that you all have regarding your own lives and also the loss, even though you've had these profound losses. All right, final thing I'm going to ask here is, if you are, willing to share any of the things on the spectrum with me and my team, we would be greatly appreciative. As I said to you earlier, we're particularly interested in shared death experiences with children, where the parents have these with their children. We have a number of them, but we would like to learn more so that we can help others who will be in your situation understand them. Okay.
William, first of all, I want to say that it's so amazing that we only met last year and that what you're doing is so similar to what we've been doing since 2009. And obviously, Raymond Moody came out with that Shared Death book, which is Glimpses of Eternity. It was written in 2009, published in 2010, but the interview that I saw on your site with Raymond Moody when I was watching with Paul Perry, actually they were out in the forest walking along, and the first screen that comes up is talking about this research. Second screen, it says that this was done on October 21st, 2009, when Morgan passed, the exact same day, exact same year that Morgan passed in Tibet at the base camp of Mount Everest, and the exact same time that I was experiencing this with Morgan. We don't have a lot of time. Unfortunately, a lot of people are on the East Coast, and we have about 7 more minutes. I know lots of people have lots of things that they'd like to ask you, but I think that the most important thing is that we allow people to get in contact with you, especially because a lot of people are saying in the sidebar that these are things that they've experienced as well. And adding to this research is it's so important to all of us to be able to allow other people, other parents to know about this, as well as other people who have had a loved one transition and who might not know where they are, or who have had an experience like this, who have had a shared death experience and who think they're crazy, or a near-death experience. Luckily, there are books out there now that talk about these, but I felt so good when I was able to tell you about this and understand that this is something that people are experiencing all over the world. It's not just me. It's not just you guys, because I've been reading what you all have been experiencing as well. I want to tell you, William, that Blanca is talking about the 21-day doorway across the veil that Mary Burton has been doing with our group. She just wrote it. It's a way of connecting with our children. It's automatic writing, but it is something that has transformed their lives. It's amazing to me because when we are holding the smaller groups and people are talking, the moms and the dads, although I think mostly moms have taken this course so far, and it's interesting that you say moms who have had sons pass, because I think that a lot of us can identify with that, although there are certainly other parents in our group as well. But they are amazingly far ahead on their healing journey because of this connection that exists, that will always exist. I mean, that's another thing that's really important to say. You talk about up to 6 months and then it seems to drop off, but it doesn't have to. And for me, after 10 years, I feel like Morgan and Chelsea are as much a part of my life as they were in the very beginning. And I think that okay, yes, let's stop the screen share. I think that's a good idea. If we can do that, I'm just going to take that off of there. It'll be easier to see everyone that way. So anyway, I know that people do have questions though, and a lot of people are just letting me know in this sidebar that yes, so Roseanne is saying we have an obligation to share. Yes, we all do. And it's so great that all of you are on here tonight. I'm so excited that we'll be able to have this on our YouTube site as well, so that other people can learn about this, because these are all things that all of us are experiencing. And it's kind of synchronicity that brought us together, and had William ask me to talk about Morgan. But anyway, did you want to say, Kathy, I would like to have you just maybe say a few words, because you were writing some things in the sidebar as well. Obviously, this is something that you've been experiencing.
I had just said that we have 2 children on the other side. and they both passed within 8 months of each other in 2013. So we're at the 7+ year mark. And the communications that I'm getting with my children have actually gotten stronger rather than tapered off. So I don't know if that's anything that your group would ever want to learn more about, but it seems like a lot of the parents, and I think what that really boils down to is that we realize that it's a give and take communication. And so the relationships continue and get stronger. And there's very much purpose to it.
Well, and I think that one of the things that is the most exciting about all of this is that when we understand what's out there, we can actually work towards achieving it and being able to have the same kind of results. So this book with Mary Burton is so pertinent because it has helped so many of the parents. And there are other, we use a lot of different ways of communication, William, not just automatic writing, but also meditation, energy healing, Reiki, yoga nidra, all different kinds of techniques to be able to connect with our kids. And so anyway, but I am sorry. I know that it's almost 9:30, especially for Kathy, so I don't want to keep you guys up too late. But as I say, please be sure all of William's information is in the sidebar. Please be sure to write it down. Maybe he can come back another time and talk to us and answer questions. That's also a possibility. So if he'd be willing to.
Sure.
And we truly appreciate you being here. Do you have any words you'd like to say in conclusion, William?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me to share our research and what we've learned. Thank you all for listening and being attentive. I was looking at the numbers. As a speaker, when people walk out of the room, it always kind of hurts your feelings a little bit. But no, the numbers were rising up the whole time. So thank you for staying around. And then just to say, our research does say, and this is the ADC, after death communication research, that communication does tend to tail off and get less frequent. But you're absolutely right. For those of you, and that's what you're doing from what I'm gathering, is you are welcoming this communication. You're engaging it. You're asking for more. You're showing up. So you're honoring this relationship, and it's a relationship. So if you're honoring it and participating, your loved ones are responding. So it totally makes sense to me that it's getting deeper and more meaningful, as you said, Kathy, here many years later. So we're, just to be clear, so for our research, which I really appreciate you all offering your accounts to us or getting in touch with us, is we are interested in the categories that we're studying, because there's a good deal of information about after-death communication that goes on a number of years afterwards, and we love that, but our contribution is really around the death and dying. So we like to keep it certainly within 6 months of the death. We're really trying to bring people into relationship with what happens before, during, and after a death. We just think it's something that's avoided in our culture, and we really want to bring light to it. So.
Well, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And this has been fascinating for me. It was really interesting to be able to listen to these other speakers as well, who are going through the same things that we are. And I don't know if you're able to read the sidebar. Sangeeta is saying, thank you so much. This presentation helped me revalidate. Oh, I've got something above that. Helped me revalidate my communication with my son. I am glad I am not alone. I don't feel left out. Thank you so much. Blanca is saying, thank you so much. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, from Nancy, as well as Aaron. Thank you, William. This is awesome. Thank you. I don't know if you can see this. Valentina, fascinating indeed. Thank you. So everyone's saying thank you, but what we do before we leave is we always unmute our microphones and say goodbye and thank you as well. So can everyone unmute and say goodbye to William and to Kathy?
Bye,
Thank
William.
you, Kathy.
Bye, William.
Bye, William.
Thank you.
Thank you, William.
Thank you very much.
Thank
This
you,
was
Kathy.
awesome.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.